The mechanic lived a quiet, simple life. His days were spent in a small garage on the edge of town, surrounded by the constant hum of engines and the smell of grease. People in the neighborhood knew him as someone who could fix almost anything. Cars, motorcycles, even old farm machines, if it was broken, he could make it run again. He didn't ask for much in return, and he preferred it that way. Life was simple, and he liked it that way. One late afternoon, as the sun began to dip, behind the hills, the mechanic decided to take a walk around the outskirts of town. He liked walking after work. It cleared his mind and gave him a chance to think about small things, the repairs he had done that day, the groceries he needed, or just nothing at all. That day, something unusual caught his eye. Far off near HFY, deserted part of the scrapyard, there was a strange shape half buried in the dirt. At first, he thought it was just another pile of old metal, maybe a piece of an abandoned vehicle. But as he got closer, he realized it was something far stranger. The object was unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't a car, it wasn't a plane, and it certainly wasn't a motorcycle. Its surface was smooth and reflective, almost like glass mixed with metal, and faint, glowing lines ran along its body. The closer he got, the more he noticed the strange symbols carved into the surface shapes that didn't make any sense at first glance. They were not letters or numbers, not anything from Earth. They seemed alive, almost as if they were pulsing gently under the fading sunlight dot. Despite feeling a little nervous, the mechanic's curiosity got the better of him. He was a man of logic and hands-on experience, but he had never seen technology like this before. He crouched down, running his fingers over the glowing lines. To his surprise, the lines seemed to respond, glowing brighter where he touched. A small shiver ran down his spine, but it wasn't fear, it was wonder. He had seen a lot of machines in his life, but nothing that seemed almost alive. He looked around to make sure no one was watching. After all, he lived in a small town where strange sightings traveled fast, and he didn't want the object to be reported before he could understand it. With a grunt, he pulled out a set of ropes and began dragging the object toward his garage. It was heavy, much heavier than any car part, but his years of handling heavy engines had made him strong. By the time the first stars appeared in the sky, he had managed to get the object inside his small workshop. Inside, the garage looked like it always did: tools scattered across benches, oil stains on the floor, and shelves crowded with spare parts. But now, the strange object dominated the space. It hummed softly, a sound almost like a heartbeat, vibrating through the floor and into the mechanic's bones. He stared at it for a long moment, trying to figure out where to start. There were panels, lines, and openings, but nothing familiar. It wasn't like opening the hood of a car. It was more like standing in front of a puzzle with thousands of pieces, none of which belonged to anything he had seen before. Despite the difficulty, he didn't panic. That wasn't his way. If he had learned one thing in life, it was that patience solved problems. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and carefully examined every inch of the object. He noticed small dents and scratches, signs of a rough journey, as if it had been through a storm or crash. He realized that whatever this was, it had survived something terrible. His heart ached slightly at the thought. He had always had a soft spot for things that were broken and alone. Cars, machines, even old tools, they all deserved care. Why not this too? Over the next few hours, he began making small adjustments. He cleaned dust and debris from its surface, polished the glowing lines, and tried pressing a few of the panels to see if anything would respond. The object seemed to react to his touch. Tiny lights blinked, and some sections made soft clicking noises. The mechanic leaned closer, listening, fascinated. It was almost as if the object was trying to communicate. Though he couldn't understand it. By the time the clock struck midnight, he had made significant progress. The object wasn't fully alive yet, but it was responding to his care. The mechanic had never thought of himself as someone who worked miracles, but tonight he felt a quiet pride. He had taken something unknown and fragile and brought it back from the edge of being lost forever. As he stepped back to admire his work, he noticed something strange. The air in the garage felt different. It wasn't cold or warm, it was alive, almost like the object was breathing. He laughed quietly to himself, thinking how ridiculous it sounded. "It's just a machine," he muttered. But deep down, he felt something more. There was a presence, something watching him, and it wasn't hostile. It was curious, almost shy. He decided to leave it for the night, covering it with a tarp and switching off the lights. The quiet hum continued underneath, steady and calm. He couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the strange object glowing in the dark, waiting for him. Questions swirled in his mind. Where had it come from? Who had built it? And most importantly, what was it for? The next morning, he returned to the garage before the sun rose. He couldn't wait to see if the reactions he had caused the night before had any effect. To his surprise, a few of the panels were slightly open, as if inviting him to continue. He spent the entire day observing, touching, and experimenting. Slowly, carefully, he began to map out its structure, making small repairs using tools he had made himself over the years. Each adjustment seemed to please the object. It pulsed a little brighter, hummed a little louder. As days turned into weeks, the mechanic became completely absorbed. He stopped noticing time. Meals were brief, sleep was short, but he didn't mind. There was a sense of purpose, a feeling he hadn't had in years. In fixing this strange object, he felt connected to something much bigger than himself. He had no idea that far away, someone or something was counting on him in ways he couldn't imagine. And all the while, he remained completely unaware. Every careful touch, every patient adjustment, every tiny repair he made was quietly saving a life he didn't know existed. Somewhere in the shadows of a nearby forest, a wounded creature stirred, connected to the object in ways the mechanic could never understand. Every pulse of light, every hum of energy that he restored, brought that creature closer to survival. The mechanic didn't know it yet, but his life, and the life of something extraordinary, were now intertwined. What had begun as a simple walk on the edge of town had turned into a story much larger than anything he had ever imagined. And the most remarkable part of it all was that he had done it without knowing. He had simply followed his curiosity, his skill, and his instinct to help something broken in the quiet moments before dawn. As he wiped grease from his hands and looked at the glowing object, he felt a strange warmth. Not from the lights, not from the hum, but from the knowledge deep in his heart that he was doing the right thing. He didn't know that he was not just fixing a machine, but that he was on the edge of something miraculous, something that would change his life and perhaps the life of an entire universe forever. And with that thought lingering in the morning light, he prepared to continue his work, unaware that the first chapter of an incredible story had already begun. The mechanic woke up the next morning with a sense of purpose. The strange object from the scrapyard still hummed quietly in his garage, as if it were waiting for him to continue the work he had started. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and walked over to it, feeling the familiar vibration through the floorboards beneath his feet. He had spent hours observing it the previous week, noting the way it responded to touch, the strange pulses of light that ran along its surface, and the way some panels seemed to almost breathe. Today, he was determined to see how much more he could understand. He began by carefully examining the smaller sections of the object, testing each panel to see how it responded. Some of them opened slightly when pressed in the right way, revealing intricate circuits and components unlike anything he had ever worked on before. The materials were unlike any metal or plastic he knew. They were smooth, strong, and light, and they seemed almost alive. The mechanic felt a thrill of excitement. He had always enjoyed fixing things, but this was unlike anything he had ever touched. It was a puzzle, a challenge, and a mystery all in one. He decided to start with the parts that looked most damaged. Using tools he had crafted over years of repairing engines, he gently removed broken connectors and replaced them with improvised pieces. Each time he made a successful adjustment, the object responded with a small pulse of light. It was subtle at first, but over time the pulsing became brighter, almost as if it were thanking him. The mechanic couldn't explain it, and he didn't try to. He just followed his instincts, letting his hands work carefully and deliberately, trusting that his experience and patience would guide him. The hours passed quickly. Time seemed to stretch in the garage as he focused entirely on the object. The outside world faded away, the chirping of birds, the distant hum of traffic, even the sunlight streaming through the windows, all of it became secondary to the task at hand. The mechanic felt completely absorbed, almost like he had entered a different reality. Every adjustment he made, every panel he repaired, brought a sense of satisfaction, unlike anything he had felt before. As he worked, he noticed something even stranger. Certain parts of the object seemed to respond to his thoughts or intentions. He didn't understand how it was possible, but if he carefully visualized what he wanted to happen pressing a panel, connecting a wire, or adjusting a component, the object seemed to move in response. A small section would slide open, a light would glow, or a sound would hum softly. It was as if the object was learning from him, or perhaps recognizing that he meant no harm. The mechanic paused for a moment and shook his head in disbelief. He had fixed many complicated machines before, but this was unlike anything he had ever seen. By the middle of the day, he had made significant progress. The object was no longer just a broken shell. It was beginning to respond consistently to his touch. Some of the panels now opened smoothly, the lights glowed brighter, and the humming sound had a steady rhythm. The mechanic felt a quiet pride. He was doing something meaningful. He was restoring life to something that had been abandoned, something that clearly mattered far more than he could understand. Despite the excitement, he remained cautious. He didn't know what the object was, and he certainly didn't know what it could do. He had learned long ago that rushing into unknown technology without patience or care could be dangerous. So he worked slowly, deliberately, testing each connection and adjustment multiple times before moving on. Sometimes he would step back, observe, and think about the next move. Other times he would experiment, gently pressing or twisting a part to see how it reacted. It was a delicate balance between caution and curiosity, and he felt completely in his element. As the sun began to set, the mechanic noticed something unusual. A faint shimmer appeared along one edge of the object, almost like a reflection, but moving in a way that didn't make sense. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. The shimmer pulsed with light, and suddenly a soft melodic hum filled the air around him. It was unlike any sound he had ever heard, neither mechanical nor musical, but somehow both at once. It resonated deep in his chest, and for a moment he froze. He realized he wasn't alone. Something was observing him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, but he didn't feel afraid. Instead, he felt a strange sense of calm. It was as if the presence knew he meant no harm. The mechanic slowly turned, half expecting to see someone in the garage, but the space was empty. The feeling persisted, however, gentle and steady, as if the object itself had a guardian watching over it. He returned to his work, more careful than before. Every movement of his hands was precise, and every adjustment was made with care. Hours passed, and the object continued to respond positively. Small sections that had been stuck for weeks now moved smoothly. Lights glowed steadily, and the hum grew stronger. The mechanic realized that he had reached a point where the object was no longer entirely inanimate. It had some form of awareness. It didn't speak or move on its own yet, but it was alive in a way he could feel. That night, he decided to sleep in the garage. He laid a small blanket on the floor near the object, not because he feared leaving it alone, but because he felt a strange connection to it. It was as if the object had become a companion, something he had rescued, and now it was part of his life. The hum continued through the night, steady and comforting, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time in years, he felt truly connected to something beyond himself, something extraordinary and beautiful. Over the next few days, his work became more intricate. He discovered new panels, hidden compartments, and delicate circuits that responded to pressure, sound, and even temperature. Some sections required him to improvise tools or create custom connectors, and each success brought a small pulse of light and a soft vibration through the garage floor. It was becoming clearer that the object was designed to be repaired with care and patience, not force. The mechanic felt proud of his ability to understand it without causing harm as he worked. He noticed patterns in the object's reactions. Certain panels would respond only when touched in a specific sequence. Lights would flash in harmony with the hum, almost as if signaling instructions. The mechanic began to follow the patterns intuitively, experimenting with different sequences until the object responded consistently. He felt like he was learning a new language, one made of light, sound, and motion. Each small breakthrough filled him with wonder, as if he were discovering a secret the universe had hidden for him alone. One evening, as he carefully adjusted a delicate panel, he felt a sudden shift in the air. A faint ripple passed through the garage, and the lights on the object flickered in response. He paused, holding his breath. For the first time, he sensed a presence so close that it almost felt tangible. Something or someone was there, observing his every move. And yet, it wasn't threatening. There was no fear, no aggression. Just a quiet, patient awareness, waiting for him to do the right thing. The mechanic worked late into the night, guided by instinct, patience, and careful observation. Slowly, the object began to resemble what it had been before it was damaged, its panels aligning perfectly, its lights glowing steadily, and its hum pulsing with life. He realized that he had repaired more than just a machine. Something was awakening inside it, something that had been dormant for a long time got by the time the first light of dawn touched the garage. He stepped back and took a deep breath. The object was no longer just a strange artifact from the scrapyard. It was alive, responsive, and humming with energy. The mechanic didn't fully understand what he had done, and he didn't know the true significance of his work. All he knew was that he had helped something broken, something extraordinary, and in doing so, he had awakened a presence that had been waiting for him all along. Little did he know, somewhere nearby, a creature bound to this object stirred. The mechanic had no idea that every adjustment, every careful repair he had made, was not just restoring a machine, it was restoring a life. And as the sun rose, casting golden light across the garage, he felt a quiet sense of purpose, unaware that the work he had begun was only the first step in a story far greater than he could imagine. The mechanic smiled, wiping the sweat and grease from his hands. He had no idea that the next part of this journey would change his life forever. And he had no idea that somewhere, a being majestic, powerful, and unlike anything he had ever imagined, was slowly regaining strength because of his care. The mechanic had spent days repairing the strange object, completely absorbed in his work. The hum of energy, the gentle pulses of light, and the faint shimmer in the air had become part of his routine. He began to feel a strange connection with it, as if it were more than just a machine. There was a life within it, something he couldn't see but could sense, like a heartbeat hidden beneath metal and circuits. He didn't know how or why, but he felt responsible for it. Every adjustment, every small repair he made seemed to matter in a way that went far beyond fixing a broken object. He had grown used to the feeling of being watched, though he never saw anyone. Sometimes, when he worked late into the night, he would hear a soft rustle or a quiet shifting of air. At first, he thought it was his imagination. Old garages made strange noises: the wind, the settling of metal, maybe even rats. But there was something different here, something deliberate. He could feel a presence moving carefully around the garage, always close, but never revealing itself. It didn't feel threatening. On the contrary, there was a sense of curiosity and caution, as if whoever or whatever was there didn't want to alarm him. The mechanic began to notice small signs that something else was tied to the object. Sometimes, tools he had carefully placed in a certain spot were slightly moved. Panels that had been firmly shut would be found open in the morning, but without any damage. He would hear soft, almost musical hums coming from the object when he wasn't touching it. At first, he chalked it up to imagination, but over time, he realized it wasn't imagination. Something was alive in the garage besides him. One night, as he worked on a particularly delicate section of the object, he sensed movement behind him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he froze. He slowly turned, half expecting to see a person standing there. But the garage was empty. The shadows stretched and flickered in the dim light, but there was no one. Then he heard a soft, low rumble, almost like a sigh, coming from somewhere close, yet impossible to locate. He took a cautious step forward, curiosity overcoming fear. The hum from the object pulsed in response to his movement, and the lights along its surface brightened slightly. It was almost as if the object were aware of the presence, as if it were communicating silently. The mechanic stared at it, trying to understand, but it remained a mystery. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw it a shadow, moving in a way that didn't match any human figure. It was large, fluid, and graceful. He blinked, thinking it might be a trick of the light, but when he looked again, the shadow was still there. The mechanic realized he was not alone. Something enormous and alive was hiding nearby. He could feel its energy, a mix of power and fragility, as if the creature had been through something terrible. It didn't approach him directly. Instead, it lingered in the shadows, watching quietly, assessing whether he was a threat. The mechanic took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He had no idea what it was, but he sensed that it was connected to the object he had been repairing. Somehow, his actions had reached it, had touched it, had kept it alive. Days passed, and the mechanic continued his work, increasingly aware of the unseen presence. Sometimes he would catch glimpses of movement, a flash of glowing scales in the corner of his vision, the shimmer of wings too large to belong to any known animal. He started leaving small offerings of food near the edge of the garage, pieces of meat or fish he had bought from the market. The next morning, some of it would be gone, eaten carefully and deliberately, without leaving a trace. It was clear that the creature trusted him enough to come close, but not enough to reveal itself fully. Despite the growing mystery, the mechanic never let fear stop him. He had spent his life fixing broken things, and he had learned that patience and understanding could solve almost any problem. He approached the unseen creature with respect, speaking softly to it sometimes, even though he didn't know if it could hear him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he would say, more to reassure himself than anything else. And slowly, he began to feel a bond forming, a silent understanding between him and the creature, mediated by the object they both depended on. One evening, as he adjusted a particularly tricky panel, the object responded in a way it hadn't before. The lights along its surface glowed in a rhythmic pattern, and a soft pulse of warmth radiated from it. The mechanic froze, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. He looked around the garage, and for the first time, he thought he saw the creature fully, not clearly, but enough to make out its massive shape. Its head was enormous, its eyes glowing faintly like amber, and its body coiled gracefully, almost like it was resting but alert at the same time. He could feel the creature's gaze on him, calm but intense, and he realized that it was aware of him as more than just a human who fixed machines. The mechanic didn't panic. Instead, he stayed still, letting the creature observe him. He spoke softly, explaining his work, describing what he had done, how he had repaired the panels, how he had tried to be careful. Whether the creature understood him or not, he felt it listening. The gentle hum of the object continued in the background, like a bridge connecting them. And slowly, ever so slowly, the shadow moved closer. Not threateningly, but with trust, testing whether it could approach safely. Over the next few days, the mechanic noticed subtle changes. The object seemed to pulse more consistently, lights glowing steadily, as if feeding the energy of the creature nearby. The creature moved more boldly, lingering at the edges of the garage for longer periods, occasionally revealing glimpses of its massive wings or tail. The mechanic started leaving more substantial offerings, learning from the way they were consumed. Sometimes, he would wake in the middle of the night to find the creature resting just outside the garage, its faint glow visible in the dark. He never disturbed it, but he felt a quiet pride and wonder. The bond between the mechanic, the object, and the creature deepened. The mechanic began to understand that every adjustment he made, every repair he completed, was helping the creature heal. It was more than coincidence. His skill, patience, and care were sustaining life. He had saved this mysterious being without even knowing it, simply by following his instinct to fix what was broken. And in return, the creature was slowly revealing itself, teaching him through presence and silence about trust, patience, and the power of compassion. One night, after weeks of careful observation, the mechanic finally felt he had earned the creature's trust. He left the garage door slightly open, a silent invitation. The creature moved closer, stepping into the dim light of the garage. Its massive body coiled around the object, almost protectively, and the mechanic could see faint patterns of glowing scales along its skin, similar to the symbols on the object itself. It was breathtaking, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. And yet, it made no move to attack, no growl, no threatening motion. It simply observed him, as if trying to understand the human who had saved it. For the first time, the mechanic realized the truth. He hadn't just repaired a strange object. He had saved a life. A being so powerful, so extraordinary, had survived only because he had been willing to touch, to care, and to patiently repair what was broken. And as he stood there, watching the creature breathe softly, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. The connection they shared was fragile, delicate, and sacred. One wrong move, one careless action, could undo everything he had accomplished. From that night on, the mechanic's work took on new meaning. Every repair was no longer just about fixing metal and circuits. It was about sustaining life, nurturing trust, and understanding a being far beyond human comprehension. And though he did not yet know the full story, he sensed that the creature, the object, and he were now linked in a way that could not be broken. As he prepared for sleep that night, he looked at the creature resting just outside the garage, its glowing eyes watching him calmly. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." The creature responded with a soft rumble, and though he couldn't understand it, he felt a quiet acknowledgement. A bond had been formed, invisible but unbreakable, between a human, a machine, and a being from beyond the stars. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the garage, the creature began to regain strength, moving with more confidence, testing its wings, and stretching its massive limbs. The mechanic watched in awe, unaware that he had just witnessed the first steps of something miraculous, a life restored, a bond formed, and a journey that was only just beginning. The garage was quiet that night, except for the familiar hum of the object, pulsing steadily like a heartbeat. The mechanic had spent countless hours over the past days repairing and observing it, and tonight he felt a strange anticipation in the air. There was something different in energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, and a warmth that wasn't coming from any lamp or heater. He knew somehow that tonight something extraordinary would happen. He approached the object cautiously, hands trembling slightly with a mix of excitement and awe. Every panel, every glowing line seemed brighter than before, pulsating in a rhythm that almost matched his own heartbeat. He reached out and lightly touched one of the panels, and to his surprise, it shifted slightly under his fingers, as if inviting him to continue. The soft hum grew louder, filling the garage with a vibration that was gentle, but impossible to ignore. The mechanic took a deep breath. He had been patient, careful, and respectful, and now it seemed as though the object was responding in a way he had never seen before. The lights along its surface began to glow more brightly, forming patterns he didn't understand. They twisted and shimmered like liquid fire, moving in a mesmerizing rhythm that drew him closer. It was as if the object itself were waking up, coming alive after so long in silence. Suddenly, a pulse of energy surged through the garage, strong enough to make the mechanic stumble backward. The hum became a low, vibrating roar, and the air seemed to shimmer around the object. He could feel the energy coursing through the floor, through his body, through everything in the garage. It wasn't dangerous, but it was powerful, overwhelming, and utterly fascinating. He watched, wide-eyed, as the panels aligned perfectly, and a soft, golden glow spread across the object, illuminating every corner of the space dot. And then he saw it, from the shadows in the corner of the garage. The creature he had sensed for weeks began to emerge. Its massive form stretched upward, wings partially unfolded, scales reflecting the golden light from the object. The glow from the object seemed to connect with the creature, flowing along its body in intricate patterns. Its eyes, wide and intelligent, focused on the mechanic, and for the first time, he saw them clearly. They were not human eyes, but they were full of awareness, gratitude, and a quiet intensity that made him realize just how extraordinary this being truly was. The creature stepped forward slowly, testing its strength. Its claws clicked softly against the concrete floor, but there was no threat in its movement. It was powerful, yes, but careful, deliberate, and respectful. The mechanic felt a strange mixture of fear and wonder, knowing that one wrong move could be disastrous, yet understanding that this being trusted him, even if only a little. He stayed perfectly still, hands slightly raised in a gesture of peace. Then, something even more incredible happened. The object seemed to recognize the creature fully. Its panels opened like petals, and a soft wave of energy flowed from it directly into the being. The creature shuddered, not in fear, but in relief. Its wings stretched fully, testing the air as if remembering how to move freely again. The soft hum of the object became a gentle melody, almost like a song, and the garage was filled with warmth, light, and a sense of life that neither the mechanic nor anyone else had ever experienced. The mechanic could hardly believe what he was seeing. All his careful work, all his patience and effort had led to this moment. He had repaired something broken, and in doing so, he had restored life. The creature, this magnificent alien dragon, was alive again, regaining strength and freedom because of him. He felt a surge of pride, but also humility. He realized that this was bigger than him, bigger than anything he had ever imagined. He had been a small part of something truly miraculous. The creature moved closer, wings folding gracefully as it lowered its massive head. It did not roar or attack. Instead, it made a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a purr, directed at him. The mechanic understood instinctively that it was a sign of gratitude, a gesture of trust. The object continued to pulse gently, and the connection between the two was unmistakable. They were bound together now, the creature and the object, and the mechanic was the link that had made it possible. For hours, the garage remained in this strange, magical state. The creature explored its surroundings carefully, testing its strength and balance, while the object's lights danced along its body. The mechanic watched every movement, fascinated and humbled. He could see the intelligence in the creature's eyes, the way it seemed to understand him without words. He felt a connection he had never experienced before, a bond that transcended language, species, and even worlds. At one point, the creature approached the mechanic, its massive head lowering to his level. He could feel its warm breath, faint but powerful, and it nuzzled him gently, a clear sign of trust and recognition. The mechanic's hands shook as he reached out, touching the soft, warm scales along its snout. It was incredible, terrifying, and beautiful all at once. He realized that he was in the presence of something ancient and wise, something that had survived incredible odds, and that he had played a key role in its survival. The night passed with the mechanic and the creature in silent companionship. He continued to observe the object, learning how it responded to the creature's presence, how energy flowed between them, and how the two were connected. He realized that repairing the object had not been just a technical task, it had been an act of care, compassion, and understanding. By following his instincts and treating the unknown with respect, he had facilitated a miracle. As dawn approached, the creature coiled around the object protectively, resting but alert. The mechanic stepped back, exhausted but exhilarated. He had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would change his life forever. The object had awakened, the creature had regained its strength, and he had become part of something far larger than himself. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was not just a mechanic fixing machines. He was a participant in something truly miraculous. The morning light filtered through the garage windows, casting soft shadows across the scene. The creature stirred slightly, testing its wings, and the mechanic watched in awe. He realized that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The object and the creature were alive in a way that he could barely comprehend, and he had a role to play in what came next. He didn't know how, or why, or what the future held, but he knew that his life had changed forever, and as the sun rose higher, the mechanic felt a deep sense of peace. He had repaired a broken object, saved a life, and witnessed something beyond human understanding. The connection between him, the object, and the creature was now unbreakable, a silent bond forged through patience, care, and trust. He didn't need words to understand it. He felt it in every pulse of light, every hum of energy, and every gentle movement of the magnificent being beside him. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile, truly and freely. He knew that his life would never be the same again. He had been a simple mechanic, living a quiet, ordinary life, and now he was part of a story that stretched far beyond the stars. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the start of an adventure that would test him, challenge him, and show him the true power of kindness, patience, and courage. The garage was no longer just a workshop. It had become a place of life, energy, and extraordinary wonder. And as the mechanic stood there, watching the creature awaken fully and the object shine with vitality, he understood that he had been given a rare gift, the chance to witness a miracle, and to be a part of something truly unforgettable. After the dragon fully awakened, the garage felt alive in a way the mechanic had never experienced before. Every hum of the object, every pulse of light, and even the quiet breath of the creature seemed to form a rhythm, almost like a living heartbeat shared between them. The mechanic stood back for a moment, taking it all in. He had repaired the object, and in doing so, he had not only saved it, but had given life back to a being so extraordinary that it seemed almost unreal. He still could hardly believe it, yet here it was, right in front of him, alive and breathing, aware and powerful. The first days after the awakening were a delicate balance. The dragon was regaining strength, and the mechanic had to learn how to interact without startling it. The creature was cautious, moving gracefully but carefully around the garage, testing its wings and limbs. Its eyes, deep and intelligent, followed him constantly. Sometimes it would step closer, then retreat, always observing. The mechanic noticed patterns in its behavior, small signs of trust that he was beginning to understand. One morning, as he worked on a minor adjustment to one of the panels, the dragon made a low, rumbling sound. He froze, unsure whether it was a warning or a greeting. Slowly, he turned to face it. Its eyes were fixed on him, calm but intense, and in that moment, he realized that the creature was trying to communicate. He didn't know how, but he understood that its life, at least in part, now depended on the work he continued to do. Every repair, every adjustment, every small act of care he gave the object directly affected the dragon's well-dash. Being that, it was a heavy responsibility, heavier than anything he had faced before. He had fixed broken cars, machines, and tools for years, but this was different. He wasn't just fixing something mechanical, he was sustaining a life that was magnificent, intelligent, and utterly dependent on his skill and care. The thought weighed on him, but he didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt determination. He had saved this being once. He could continue to keep it safe and healthy. Over the next few days, the mechanic started observing the dragon more closely. He noticed how the creature's scales reflected the object's light in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost like a language. Its breathing matched the pulsing of the object at times, and when the panels were properly aligned, it moved with more confidence. He realized that the dragon and the object were connected in a way far beyond simple mechanics. The creature's energy seemed to flow through it, and the object's vitality fed back into the dragon. Repairing the object wasn't just restoring metal and circuits. It was restoring the life of the creature itself. This realization brought a new level of care to his work. Every action had to be precise. Every adjustment mattered. He could no longer afford to rush or experiment without thought. One wrong move could weaken the dragon or damage the object. But he embraced the challenge. He had grown to respect the dragon deeply, not just as a creature he had helped, but as a being with intelligence, awareness, and trust. And that trust gave him courage, a quiet confidence that guided his hands and mind as he worked. During this time, the dragon began to respond in small ways. It would occasionally nuzzle the mechanic's hand with its snout, or lower its head slightly when he entered the garage. These gestures were subtle but significant. They were signs of recognition, of gratitude, and of understanding. The mechanic had never experienced anything like it. He felt a bond forming, not just through the object, but through shared care, shared patience, and shared trust. He realized that the dragon understood that he was a friend, someone who meant no harm, and who had saved it when no one else could. As the dragon grew stronger, it began to test its wings more boldly. At first, small stretches and flaps that barely lifted it off the ground. Then, gradually, longer movements, almost as if it were remembering what it once could do. The mechanic watched, amazed, and made sure to keep the object fully operational. Every pulse of energy, every functioning panel, gave the dragon more strength and freedom. It was a delicate balance, a dance of care, trust, and patience. He had never felt so connected to a living being, and yet the connection was undeniable. One evening, as he was adjusting a particularly sensitive section of the object, the dragon made a low, vibrating hum. It was not a sound of threat, but a sound of communication. The mechanic paused, listening carefully. The hum seemed to sync with the lights of the object, pulsing in a way that almost formed a pattern. He realized that the creature was trying to show him something, its needs, its feelings, perhaps even gratitude. He followed the rhythm, adjusting the panels in harmony with the pulsing lights and sound. The dragon responded instantly, moving with more confidence, its breathing steady and calm. That night, the mechanic understood something profound. By repairing the object, he was not just restoring it mechanically. He was creating a bridge between himself and a life far beyond human understanding. The dragon depended on him, yes, but it also trusted him. And in that trust, there was a silent acknowledgement, an understanding that actions motivated by care, patience, and respect could create miracles. He felt a responsibility unlike any he had ever known. In the following days, the dragon's behavior became even more fascinating. It would watch him work for long periods, following his hands with its eyes, almost as if learning from him. Sometimes it would move closer when he made a successful adjustment, or coiled protectively around a section of the object when he paused. He realized that the creature's recovery was tied directly to his skill and dedication. Every small action he took to repair the object strengthened the dragon physically, mentally, and emotionally. Despite the enormity of the task, the mechanic never felt overwhelmed. Instead, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He had always taken pride in his work, but this was different. This was no longer about fixing machines or solving problems. It was about nurturing life, sustaining trust, and understanding a being far beyond his world. He was part of something extraordinary, and though he didn't know the full story yet, he could feel that his actions mattered in ways he had never imagined. The mechanic began experimenting with ways to make the dragon more comfortable and secure in the garage. He cleared space, reinforced sections of the floor, and made sure the object was perfectly aligned. He observed how the dragon responded to light, sound, and movement, learning to adjust his work to support it better. It was like learning a language without words, a language of energy, trust, and silent communication. And as the dragon grew stronger, it became clear that this relationship was mutual. He was helping the dragon, and in return, the dragon's presence gave him a sense of purpose, awe, and wonder unlike anything else in his life. One evening, he stepped back and looked at the dragon resting beside the object. Its wings were partially folded, eyes glowing softly, and the light from the object shimmered along its scales. The connection between them was undeniable. He realized that what he had done, what he continued to do, had saved not just a machine, but a life. And in that life, he saw the reflection of care, patience, and trust he had given freely. The dragon had survived because of him, and he had survived the journey of understanding it because of his own courage and dedication. From that moment on, the mechanic no longer saw his work as merely technical. Every action, every adjustment, every careful touch became part of a living bond. The dragon was more than a creature he had saved. It was a teacher, a companion, and a reminder of what could be achieved through patience, respect, and kindness. And though he did not yet know what the future held, he felt confident that this bond, once formed, would endure. As the night grew late, the mechanic cleaned his tools and stepped back, watching the dragon settle beside the object. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I will take care of you. I promise." The dragon responded with a soft, vibrating hum, a sound that he felt more than heard. It was acknowledgement, understanding, and trust all at once. In that moment, he knew that the truth had been revealed. His role was not just to repair the object, but to sustain the life connected to it. And he accepted it fully, with humility, courage, and a deep sense of purpose. The garage had become a place of life, connection, and trust. And as the mechanic watched the dragon's steady breathing and the object's gentle hum, he realized something profound. Saving something broken could lead to miracles, and caring deeply, patiently, and respectfully could create bonds that transcended species, worlds, and understanding. He had repaired more than an object. He had restored a life and discovered the extraordinary power of human care and dedication. The days that followed the dragon's full awakening were unlike anything the mechanic had ever experienced. The creature had regained most of its strength, moving with a grace and confidence that seemed almost unreal. Its wings stretched fully now, brushing against the garage walls, and the glowing patterns along its scales shone brighter than ever. The object, now fully repaired, pulsed with a soft, rhythmic energy that filled the entire space, connecting the mechanic and the dragon in ways he still didn't fully understand. The mechanic had learned a lot in the past weeks. He had discovered how to read the subtle signals of the dragon, the way it tilted its head, the way its eyes followed his hands, the gentle hums that resonated from its throat. He had learned the language of the object, the panels, the lights, the vibrations, and how every adjustment affected the dragon's well-being. What had started as simple curiosity and the desire to repair a strange object had turned into something far deeper, a bond of trust, respect, and mutual care that neither he nor the dragon could ignore. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the garage windows, he watched the dragon stretch its wings fully and let out a low, rumbling sound. The sound was different this time. It wasn't just a hum or a vibration. It was deliberate, almost musical, and the mechanic instinctively understood that it was directed at him. The dragon's eyes met his, and in that gaze, he felt something profound: gratitude, acknowledgement, and a quiet but powerful trust. The creature had survived because of him, and now it was ready to show the bond it felt in return. He approached slowly, speaking softly, though he knew the dragon might not understand his words. "You're safe now," he said, almost whispering. "I'll keep taking care of you, always." The dragon responded with another low hum, a vibration that ran through the floor and into his chest. The mechanic felt a warmth, a reassurance that he had never known before. It was as if the creature was saying, without words, "I know you saved me. I trust you. You are part of my life now." Over the next few days, the mechanic began to notice changes in the dragon's behavior that were remarkable. It no longer stayed in the shadows or hesitated to move near him. Instead, it followed him around the garage with a sense of purpose, curling protectively around the object, and at times nudging him gently with its snout or tail. There was a playful intelligence in its eyes now, and the mechanic realized that the dragon had begun to recognize him not only as a savior, but also as a companion, someone who was indispensable in its life. The object itself seemed to respond to this new dynamic. Its lights pulsed in synchrony with the dragon's movements, and the soft hum transformed into a gentle melody that filled the air with a sense of calm and life. The mechanic noticed that when the dragon was near and content, the object functioned more smoothly, almost as if the creature's presence completed it. He realized then that the connection was mutual. The dragon depended on the object. The object responded to the dragon, and he was the link that kept both of them in harmony. One evening, the mechanic decided to test the creature's trust further. He slowly approached the dragon while it rested beside the object and extended a hand toward its snout. The dragon didn't move away. Instead, it lowered its head and allowed him to touch the smooth, warm scales along its face. The mechanic's hands shook slightly, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. He had touched many living creatures before, but nothing like this. This being was enormous, powerful, and utterly alien. Yet it had chosen to trust him completely. The dragon's response was immediate and clear. It leaned into his touch, a low rumble vibrating from deep within its chest. The object's lights pulsed in time with the rumble, and for a moment the garage seemed to exist outside of time. There was no past, no future, only the connection between human, dragon, and object. The mechanic felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, awe, humility, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. He had saved a life, and in return, that life had acknowledged him in a way he could never have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the mechanic and the dragon strengthened further. He learned to anticipate the creature's needs, preparing meals, adjusting the object, and creating spaces where it could move freely without feeling confined. In return, the dragon became a guardian and companion, often standing close while he worked, and occasionally nudging or guiding him when it sensed something important. The trust between them was no longer tentative, it was solid, built on care, patience, and understanding. The mechanic began to wonder about the dragon's origins. How had it come to be damaged? Why was it connected to the object? Though he had no answers, he felt that some mysteries were meant to remain unanswered for now. What mattered was the life in front of him, the being that had survived against all odds because of his hands and his heart. And in that moment, he understood the true purpose of his work, not just to fix, but to nurture, protect, and honor life in all its forms. One evening, as he rested near the object, the dragon approached and lowered its head to his level. He placed a hand gently on its forehead, feeling the warmth and life beneath the scales. The creature made a low, melodic rumble that vibrated through the garage and into his chest. The mechanic realized that the dragon was expressing something more than trust. It was expressing gratitude in a way that transcended words. It had survived, healed, and grown stronger because of him, and now it was showing that bond openly. The mechanic smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never known. He had spent his life repairing machines, fixing what was broken, and helping people in small ways. But this was different. This was living proof that patience, kindness, and dedication could create something extraordinary. He had saved a life, and in return, that life had chosen to trust, bond, and exist alongside him in a way that was miraculous. As the days passed, the dragon grew even more confident. It moved freely around the garage, sometimes testing the air with its wings, sometimes curling protectively around the object, and sometimes resting its head near the mechanic as if to say, "I am here. I am alive. And I am grateful." The object pulsed steadily, its energy flowing in harmony with the dragon, and the mechanic felt the full circle of connection. He understood now that the work he had done was not just mechanical repair, it was an act of creation, an act of care, and an act of trust that had restored life itself. One morning, the mechanic stood outside the garage, watching the sunlight illuminate the dragon and the object together. The creature moved with elegance, its scales reflecting the light, and the object pulsed softly beside it. He realized that he had witnessed a miracle unfold before him, a miracle that he had played a part in through his skill, patience, and compassion. And though he did not fully understand the cosmic or alien forces that had brought the dragon and the object together, he knew that his actions had mattered in ways he could never have imagined. In the quiet moments, the dragon would often nuzzle the mechanic gently, reminding him of the bond they shared. The mechanic had become more than just a caretaker. He was now part of the dragon's life, a companion who had helped restore something extraordinary. He felt a sense of pride and humility, knowing that his simple acts of repair and care had led to something far greater than he could have ever dreamed. And so, the garage was no longer just a place of work. It had become a sanctuary, a home, and a place of trust. The mechanic, the dragon, and the object existed in harmony, connected through patience, care, and understanding. Every day, he learned more about the dragon's needs, the object's functions, and the profound connection between them. He realized that saving something broken, whether it was a machine or a life, required more than skill. It required heart, attention, and a willingness to care deeply. As the sun set one evening, the dragon coiled beside the object, its eyes reflecting the soft glow. The mechanic stood nearby, placing a gentle hand on the creature's head. He whispered, "You're safe. You're alive. And I will always be here." The dragon responded with a soft, vibrating hum, a sound that resonated in the garage and in the mechanic's chest. It was acknowledgement, gratitude, and trust all at once. And in that moment, he knew that their journey had reached a perfect balance, a life saved, a bond formed, and a connection that would endure. The mechanic had started as a simple human, repairing what was broken. He had ended up as a witness and participant in something extraordinary. The dragon had survived, healed, and grown stronger because of him. And he had gained something far beyond any skill or knowledge, the understanding that patience, care, and trust could create miracles. The object, the dragon, and he were now linked. And together they had achieved what few could imagine: life restored, trust earned, and a bond that transcended worlds. And as the night fell, with the dragon resting peacefully beside the glowing object, the mechanic finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. He had saved a life, and in return, that life had given him something priceless: trust, companionship, and a glimpse into the extraordinary. The journey was complete, yet it was only the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold, bound together by care, patience, and an unbreakable connection.